UFC 298, Volkanovski versus Topuria. Anaheim, California has a great card this weekend. We have the featherweight belt up for grabs. We got two different fighters who both want to be Conor McGregor more than anything. This one should be a really good one. I am going to go and break down each of these fights and give my predictions through the way. Let's start off with a women's flyweight fight between Andrea Lee and Miranda Maverick. Lee is the plus 155 underdog, 2-3 in her last 5 fights. Maverick is the minus 185 favorite, 3-2 in her last 5 fights. Lee is on a 3-fight skid here, albeit against some pretty tough opponents like Macy Barber, Araujo, Natalia Silva. Miranda Maverick, on the other hand, is coming off of a submission win over Priscilla Cachoeira. Andrea Lee is the far more experienced fighter, but she is on like that wrong side of 30 years old. Rapidly approaching 40. Miranda Maverick's the up-and-comer, not nearly as much experience, but I think Miranda's just going to be able to rely on her physicality in this one and win this with her grappling. I'm going to take her to win this one by decision. I think she's going to be the stronger fighter here and probably have a little bit more in the tank later on. So Maverick by decision is the pick. Next up is a welterweight fight between Oban, Elliott, and Val Woodburn. Elliott's the minus 310 favorite, 8-2 overall, making his UFC debut. And Val Woodburn is the plus 250 underdog, and he is 0-1 in the UFC. Of course, that one loss was to Bo Nickel. He fought Bo, and I'm sure no one else really wanted to. That was at middleweight, and this is going to be a welterweight. And Val looked really good on the scales. Welterweight is definitely a more appropriate weight for him. He's only like 5'8", 5'9". I think closer to 5'8", probably. And, I mean, the guy can carry weight, and he looked absolutely jacked at 185, but he's just too short to be fighting there. This is a much better fit for him. And he's definitely dangerous, and I think he could be good value in this fight. I just think Oban has a lot more length, which was an issue with Val versus Bo Nickel. And I think Oban's just had more success against better fighters. His win in the Contender Series, I think, was more significant than really any other win that Val Woodburn has had. I'm going to take Oban to win this one by decision. Up next is a welterweight fight between Josh Quinlan and Danny Barlow. Quinlan is the plus 170 underdog and is 1-1 in the UFC. Danny Barlow is the minus 205 favorite, and he is 7-0 undefeated, making his debut. These are two Dana White Contender Series alums. Barlow had a first-round KO in his matchup versus, I think the guy's name was Raheem Forrest. You can tell he's got crazy power. His nickname is, left hand to God. I think that's because that left hand is just will send you to the afterlife or whatever. And I just don't really think Josh Quinlan can avoid that left hand for 15 minutes. I don't know if he's got the defensive abilities to do that. I'm going to take Barlow to win this one by KO, but this should be a very good fight. After that one, we have Zhang Mingyang taking on Brendson Ribeiro in the light heavyweight division. Mingyang is minus 122 favorite. Ribeiro is the plus 102 underdog. Both fighters making their debut. I did cash on Brendson Ribeiro KO at plus 1,000 as an underdog in his Dana White Contender Series fight. He's a wild fighter, but he's got a lot of finishing capability. If he doesn't KO the other guy, he's probably going to get KO'd or submitted. Zhang Mingyang is a bit more composed, takes a bit more of a cerebral approach, although he still is a finisher in his own right. He does I think he poses more of a submission threat than Ribeiro, but I just can't see, I only see this fight ending in a KO, which, you can take that as a prop, which, I plan on doing. But regardless, I think Ribeiro wins this one by KO. I think he's been fighting the better guys in the Brazilian MMA circuit than Zhang Mingyang has, fighting, some of these regional Chinese fighters. And I think Ribeiro's got a more impressive win on his resume in that Dana White Contender Series win. So Ribeiro by KO is the pick. Next up, we have a bantamweight fight between Rinya Nakamura and Carlos Vera. Nakamura is the minus 1350 favorite. You won't really find much more significant odds than that. He is 2-0 in the UFC, 8-0 overall. Carlos Vera is the plus 800 dog and is 11-3 overall, making his UFC debut. Nakamura is basically the Japanese Bo Nickel. He was an Olympic wrestling hopeful who, when the pandemic started and all wrestling was kind of on hold, he retired early and started to focus on MMA full time. He also has just kind of a crazy background. His father started like the Shuto fighting league in Japan back in like the 80s or 90s. So, this stuff's in his blood. And I think he's a very highly coveted prospect that the UFC knows could be a massive star if he can keep his undefeated streak alive and make some moves at bantamweight. He's taking on Carlos Vera here, who's going to have the experience edge, but he's a lot older. I mean, Vera does not get finished very often. I don't think he's gotten finished in many years, but I don't think he's fought someone nearly as athletic and as explosive as Rinya Nakamura. I think Nakamura is going to get a KO versus Carlos Vera here and extend the KO streak on these prelims to 3 fights in a row. Next fight on the card is a heavyweight fight that almost did not happen. It is it didn't happen. It was originally Marcos Rogerio de Lima versus Justin Tafa. What do you know? 10 minutes left in the weigh-in show. The UFC weigh-in show cast started teasing like, oh, they might have found a replacement. I'm thinking, who could this guy possibly be? Is someone we've never heard of? None other than Junior Tafa, Justin's little brother. So I think that's probably the coolest thing that could have happened in this scenario, given Justin Tafa having to bow out of the fight. De Lima is a minus 205 favorite versus Junior, which is a bit more than he was versus Justin, where he was hovering around like a minus 140. Junior's plus 170. I was picking Justin Tafa versus De Lima, and I'm picking Junior Tafa now. I mean, are they the same fighter? No, but are they just about as close to it as you can get? Yeah, I'd say so. I think Tafa wins by KO in this one. He's much younger, more explosive. Rodrigo's another guy who's, I think he's 38 years old, and it's not as significant at heavyweight, but that chin's probably seen better days. He's coming off of a, round one, pretty instantaneous KO loss to Derek Lewis. I think Junior Tafa catches his chin and cracks him. Next fight we have is a strawweight fight between Amanda Lemos and Mackenzie Dern. Lemos is the minus 135 favorite. She's 3-2 in her last 5. Dern is the plus 114 underdog and is 2-3 in her last 5. Lemos, of course, fought for the belt most recently against Zhang Weili and got pretty much dominated, in all facets. The feet, Weili was showing a maturity and a consistency in the striking that Lemos really couldn't keep up with, and then the grappling difference was even more significant. We knew Lemos was going to struggle in grappling, but I thought that she'd have a little bit more success on the feet. She's still very raw technically. I think she was a late bloomer to the sport, but she's got sort of that, God-given power, so that was able to kind of carry her to even getting that title shot. Mackenzie, on the other hand, she's had kind of a rough go of it as late. She got KO'd in her last fight versus Jessica Andrade. And this is kind of a prove-it fight for Dern. Similar to some of her most recent fights, she's lost against a lot of the top fighters. She's fought like Yan Xiaonan and Marina Rodriguez. And, she really needs a win here to prove that she can hang with the better fighters in the strawweight division. I think she gets it done. I think she has enough of a grappling advantage here to dominate Amanda Lemos in that department. And, I think if all goes well, she'll be able to just kind of cling onto her back and just hold on for dear life. Because if this one stays standing, I think it could mean trouble for Dern. But yeah, I think she's able to win this one through her grappling. First fight on the main card is a middleweight fight between Anthony Fluffy Hernandez and Roman Kopylov. Fluffy's the minus 258 favorite. He is 4-1 in his last 5 on a 4-fight win streak. And Roman is on a 4-fight win streak as well. He is the plus 210 underdog. And I am a bit surprised by this line. Kopylov's on a 4-fight finish streak. Been just knocking people out left and right. not the elite in the middleweight division, but he still has been handling his business. He's coming off of that Josh Fremd KO where he hit him with a liver shot at the end of the second round, put him down. And yeah, I thought this line would be a bit closer. I mean, if there's one thing that you can point as as a weakness for Roman Kopylov, it is his gas tank and it's his grappling defense. And that's exactly what Fluffy Hernandez does kind of better than anyone else. Fluffy burst onto the scene. He had a tough start to the UFC. I think he lost 1 or 2 in a row. And then he went out and submitted Rodolfo Vieira, the go-to jiu-jitsu guy in the middleweight division. That put a lot of people on alert for Fluffy. Although I think he still is probably the worst pure grappler compared to Rodolfo Vieira, he just mixes in the grappling so well with his striking, and he hurts people, and then he just gets them thinking about a million different things, and he's able to wrap up a submission. Roman's going to know, exactly what Fluffy's going to do, but I'm just not sure if he's going to be able to stop it. I mean, Hernandez just has this relentless pressure. He's right up on you from the get-go, and I think Roman Kopylov doesn't want someone all up in his grill. He wants to be a little further where he can get his kicks in because he's got some of the best kicks in the division. I mean, I will say I think the bigger cage with this not being in the apex, I think that should benefit Roman Kopylov a bit to be able to keep some space. And I definitely think there's a lot of value here. And it's going to be hard for me to stay away from that kind of value, but I do think Hernandez wins this one by decision. Third round, I think Roman Kopylov could start to fade, and Anthony Hernandez could really turn up the pressure there and, separate himself in that third round. Next fight is a bantamweight fight between Merab Dvalishvili and Henry Cejudo. Merab is the -225 favorite. Cejudo is the +185 underdog, and Cejudo is 4-1 in his last 5. And man, it feels like Merab might just steamroll Cejudo like he's steamrolled all of the other guys he's faced previously. He's on a 9-fight win streak after losing his first 2 fights in the UFC. And he's got wins over guys like Petr Yan, Jose Aldo. And Dvalishvili just has this physicality and relentlessness to him. Kind of similar to Fluffy Hernandez, or I should probably say Fluffy Hernandez is more similar to Merab in that way, where he just gets on these guys' legs and he will not stop until he takes them down. And frankly, I think has the grappling edge over Henry Cejudo. I mean, Olympic gold medal behind, which is absolutely crazy. And I'm sure Henry Cejudo probably, if they threw the singlet on, he's going to beat Merab in a freestyle wrestling match. But in MMA grappling, I think Merab is honestly second to none in the bantamweight division. I don't care what Cejudo's background is. I just think Merab is going to be the more relentless guy. I think he's got the better gas tank. And if he doesn't take down Cejudo early, which I genuinely think he is going to take him down early, if he doesn't, then later on into the fight, I think Cejudo will start wilting to the pressure of Merab. I think he wins a decision and relies on his, borderline psychopathic cardio in this one. The next fight on the card is a welterweight matchup between Geoff Neal and the aforementioned wannabe Conor McGregor, Ian Garry. Geoff Neal is the +190 underdog. He's 2-3 in his last 5. Ian Garry is the -230 favorite, and he's 6-0 in the UFC. Of course, jabs at Ian Garry aside, I do think Ian Garry is every bit as talented as he thinks he is, or as the UFC perhaps thinks he is. He's tall. He's got excellent striking. I think he could already compete in a striking matchup versus pretty much anyone in this welterweight division. Anyone. He's got so much length, and he's got great combinations. He's good at, getting in on people, punching them getting out of harm's way. And it's kind of hard to reach that, reach someone who has that much of a length advantage over you. Of course, got dropped by Song Kanan in that fight when I think he got cocky and sort of let his guard down a bit, but he was able to, persevere through that adversity and get a finish over Song Kanan. And then he's just gone on to pretty much dominate everyone since. Daniel Rodriguez with the head kick finish, and Neal Magny, who he pretty much dominated that whole way through. I do think Ian Garry is an eventual champion in the UFC. I have a future on him to do it this year. Might be unlikely just given the pecking order at 170, but he is kind of in that category of, of the inevitable guys, sort of your Sean O'Malley's, your, I kind of had Elliott Topuria in this category. So these guys who you're like, Tom Aspinall, young prospects who you're like, it's just a matter of time, and I do think he's that good. Geoff Neal's going to be a really tough one, though, and he can't overlook him. Geoff Neal had that potential fight of the year candidate versus Shavkat Rakhmonov, and he almost got a finish over Shavkat. I mean, he rocked Shavkat a lot of times, and I think he hit him with some shots that would put a lot of people out. That being said, Geoff Neal does sort of tend to slow down later into fights, and I think Ian Garry's going to have the advantage there. And man, the length is just going to be tough for Geoff Neal to deal with. I think Ian Garry gets a head kick KO in this one, and potentially leapfrog some of these other contenders in the welterweight division. Our co-main event is up next. It is Robert Whittaker taking on Paulo Costa. Whittaker is the minus 250 favorite, 3-2 in his last 5, and Costa is the plus 205 underdog, who is 3-2 as well. Whittaker, of course, most recently fought the now champion DDP and got finished in that fight. Fight that, not a lot of people gave DDP a chance in, but the size difference in that one was so significant, and that really proved to be the difference maker in my eyes in that fight. I mean, DDP just looked like he was in a different weight class than Whittaker, and that's, something Whittaker has dealt with throughout his career, being a guy who started out at 170. Although he's had way more success at 185 than 170. Of course, he's competed for the belt. I think the 3-round fight here is going to benefit Paulo, who comes out fast, but he just tends to fade. I mean, that Luke Rockhold fight, I think you can look past some of the cardio issues, given it was at altitude. And, I mean, Luke Rockhold as well was basically hyperventilating. It felt like some of those fighters on that card were gassed out just walking up the stairs into the octagon. But even then, Costa just can't really keep up a pace for 3 rounds that I think Whittaker can. Costa does have that. I think he's going to come in with an early onslaught and try to get out Whittaker early, and when that most likely doesn't happen, I think Whittaker just separates himself in the 2nd and 3rd rounds and wins a decision in this one. It just, love Paulo. He's might have the funniest Twitter presence of anyone in the MMA, and he's definitely explosive, but I think there's just going to be a difference in technical abilities in this one. In our main event, we have Alexander Volkanovski taking on Elliott Topuria. Of course, Volk is 3-2 in his last 5. He is the ever so slight favorite. I think he's like a minus 120. Ilya, on the other hand, 14-0, undefeated. This is his 6th, or he's 6-0 in the UFC. And, man, I knew Ilya would be here. I didn't know how long it would take. I took him to be champ at the end of last year, just hoping he would get a shot at the belt by the end of the year. Missed that by, a month and some change. But Ilya, like I said, the guy was inevitable. He's, German by birth, German by his parents, and then Spanish. And he's, been training in Spanish for a significant amount of time. He really is the pride of Spain and has that whole country behind him. There's a montage of, famous athletes rooting him on, and these are like the most famous people in Spain. I lived there for several months, and he had guys like Miranda, who's was on Atletico Madrid back in the day. Like, these are superstars in Spain, and he really does have that whole country behind him. He's super popular. I think the UFC would love to see him win this fight. He's coming in with a rare explosiveness and power in his hands that I don't think Volk has faced in a very long time. Volk was saying prior to that Yair Rodriguez fight that while Yair perhaps wasn't his most difficult opponent, he was likely his most dangerous. And I think that sentiment is even more true in this fight. Ilya might not be better than, like the Holloway that Volk fought in his first few fights, but Ilya is as dangerous as they come. He's coming off of that 5-round domination versus Josh Emmett, where he just absolutely dominated from the start. Landed clean shots on Emmett, busted him up early, and really never relented at all. Prior to that was that dominant win over Bryce Mitchell, where he just put a beating on Bryce, beat the snot out of him. And he's the young gun in this fight, and Volk is the old man. I've absolutely loved the old man shtick that Volk's been doing. Of course, there's been that stat going around that fighters 35 and older have like one win in the past however many years and 20 or so losses. Time is definitely not on Volk's side, but I don't really see how that's relevant given how good Volk has looked as of recent. Now, of course, he's coming off of that KO loss versus Islam Makhachev, where you got to look at his headspace going into that fight. He took it on 10 days' notice. He claims he was, drinking, and I don't think that Volk. I trust every word that comes out of his mouth. He's not a guy. I think he's a very honest guy, and if that really was his mindset and what he was up to going into that fight, I believe it. And I think it's fair to have your suspicions about his headspace going into this fight, just given what we know. That being said, Volk has had this aura of confidence around him this whole fight week that really was making me have supreme confidence in him. I think he's the more complete fighter in this matchup. Ilya's got explosiveness on his side, but Volk is super quick. He's got fast hands. He's got that old man strength that I think is so real that people don't talk about a lot. Like, if he gets his hands on you, we saw how he handled grappling exchanges versus Islam Makhachev. And if he can hold his own against Islam, he can do it against Ilya. Ilya's got a very impressive jiu-jitsu and grappling background. He was a Greco-Roman guy from early on, but I think Volk is going to be the slightly bigger guy. I mean, he's just a bit wider and is going to have a bit more meat on him, I think, going into the fight. So if this turns into a I think Volk is going to have the grappling edge, and you just don't see Volk on his back very often. I just don't anticipate that happening. Volk's going to have the more, I think, diverse striking approach, but Ilya, we saw what he did to Josh Emmett. We know that he can put it on for 5 rounds, and I think he's, at this point in both of their careers, I think Ilya's got the, athleticism advantage, and he's got that power that he can just cut you up. If he touches you, he can cut you up. This is one of the tougher main events I've picked, but I am going to go with Ilya to win this one by decision. I think Volk's going to be on his P's and Q's defensively, and it's going to be hard to catch him and put him out just because of how crafty he is. And it's going to be a razor-close fight. I'm going with the youth and athleticism in this one, as much as it sucks to go against Volk. But, sometimes all you need is your hands in these matchups, and I think Ilya's they're certified. So I think he lands enough damaging shots to, compensate for a bit of a lack in diversity and not having kicks and stuff. But even then, Ilya, he knows how to work the body, and if he does start to break down Volkanovski, I could see him catching Volk, and we know that Volk is not very far removed from getting KO'd. So Ilya by decision is going to be the pick, and those are my picks here. That was the Phone Home MMA review. Signing off. Let me know what you all think. Any predictions, bold claims, and I will catch you all on the next one.